What's going on, everybody? In today's video, I want to talk to you about reverse culture shocks coming back to the US after living abroad. These are things I never really thought about too much when I lived here, but after moving abroad and experiencing different parts of the world, I come back and see them in a different light, and I'm going to share them with you today. So let's start with the first culture shock that I always notice when I come back here because it affects daily life. It's the fact that I personally think the transportation system in the United States is pretty awful if you do not have a car. And there's three quick points I want to make about this. The first is that for millions of Americans, the country is just so spread out that it's really not feasible to walk around or use public transportation because it's not as readily available. So where my family currently lives outside of Buffalo, New York, if I want to leave the house to do anything, I have to drive really. I can't walk or take a bus to the grocery store or get a coffee or anything like that. And that's the case for so many different places in the US. The second thing is that I can hear people saying, yeah, but if you live in a city in the US, you can use public transportation. And that's very true. In New York City, in Washington, D.C., in other parts of the country, there's subway systems and public transit, and it's decent, I think, and you can definitely get away with doing that. But I will say that I think it's a lot less high quality than in many countries in Europe and Asia. If you look up subway creatures of New York City, and it's just like more dingy and it can be more expensive, and it's still not the most reliable in my opinion. It can be good, but it's not the most reliable. And the third thing I want to say is that if you do not have a car and live in a city, it's still difficult to get between places in the country. Like I said, I'm in Buffalo, New York right now. I want to visit some friends in Washington, D.C. I looked up bus tickets and train tickets, and the shortest duration was like 14 hours. It wasn't very cheap, or round trip $300, $350 flights. So if you don't have a car to drive between these places, it's difficult to leave the city where you're using that public transportation. All right, and now after that transportation rant, I'll move on to point number two, which I'll kind of call the entire restaurant experience. It's very different going to a restaurant in the US than in a lot of other countries. And there's multiple points that make some good, some bad. First, I love that water is free and there are like free refills on fountain drinks and things like that. In a lot of Europe and Asia, the water isn't coming right from the tap, so you have to pay for it, and then every time you want to get another bottle of a drink or anything, it costs extra money. So that's one positive thing, and the other is that it's very customer service oriented in the US. I find that you're very welcomed into the restaurant, everyone's very friendly and eager to assist you, and that's a very good positive thing about the restaurant experience. But there are also some different things that are strange compared to other countries as well. So the first is that the servers are always coming up to your table and constantly talking to you. And I find that in Europe, at least, where I'm currently living in Prague, that you come in, they say, hey, what do you want? They give you it, and they don't talk to you the rest of the time until you call for the check. And finally, tipping culture. Of course, it's so expensive to go out to eat in the US when you're expected to tip 20 to 25% on top of your meal. It's really not as affordable as it can be in other places. So I think that the tipping culture has definitely gotten out of control. And every time I come back, it seems to be like you're tipping more money. It's kind of interesting to me. And now moving on to culture shock number three, which isn't necessarily something I love talking about or experiencing, but it's the fact that I don't find the US to be a particularly safe country, and it doesn't perform very well on safety metrics compared to other countries around the world. I just think there's a lot of crime, there's gun violence, there's other issues in this country, and it's not everywhere. There's tons of safe places, and it can be very beautiful, and people are very friendly as well. But you just kind of feel a little bit more on edge here than in other parts of the world. I think that walking around at night, you have to be very aware of your surroundings, know which neighborhoods you're going into, where to go, where to avoid. And it's just more in the back of your mind than it is in, for example, when I live in Prague, I can just wander and not feel any threats. But I definitely have a little bit of increased awareness when I'm in the US. I don't love experiencing it or talking about it, but it's just the reality of the situation. But okay, I don't want you to think this is just a coming back to the US and ripping into it, saying the transportation sucks, it's not safe, and acting like I'm better than the US or something like that. No, there's also so many amazing things that I do love about this country. I'll talk about some of those now. So the fourth thing is I love the convenience of the US. The grocery stores are huge, and there's some great things that you don't really experience in other parts of the world that I've never noticed before. The first is that there's AC everywhere you go in the US, which is amazing. So you go to someone's house or you go into restaurants or anywhere really, you can get air conditioning, and that's not true in Europe. There's so many people who are sweating, and there's a body odor, and it's just hot and like muggy because there's not AC units everywhere or central heating. And then the other things are that there's dryers. In my current apartment, I only have a washer. I have to hang dry everything. It's just these small little things that the US makes convenient for people, and it's not really regularly available everywhere else. So I really like that. And I love that I can just go to the grocery store, go to Target, and get anything I want. You can go to Costco and you can get the entire world. If you have enough money for it, you can buy everything you want and never have to worry about that. So it's really convenient for certain things like that. And banking off that convenience point, the fifth thing I'll talk about is that I also love that there's a lot of personal space in the US. Because it's so spread out, everything's bigger and you can kind of have more room to breathe. Like around me, there's no one even close to me right now, which is, there's parks everywhere, but you get the point that you go to grocery stores and it's not as small, everyone's not bumping into each other as much, and there's just generally more space. Everyone knows that there's houses in the US with more space between them. It's not as crammed because there's more room to work with. So I think that personal space is definitely a convenience that you don't often get everywhere else. All right, I've talked about some negative things, some positive things, and these final 2 points I think are really open to your own interpretation of them. So number 6 is that there's way more small talk here than I'm used to in other parts of the world. When you walk, I know there's an English barrier as well, but the general gist is that if you walk into anywhere you need to talk to a customer service person at a grocery store, at a restaurant, anything like that, you're kind of expected more to contribute to conversation, like, oh, how's it going? How are you doing today? What's the crazy weather we're having? Certain things like that. And in the Czech Republic, at least, when I see anyone, it's much more like, hey, how's it going? Okay, what do you want? Let's get it done and over with. We don't have to talk to each other really as much. And that's kind of true around the world. So it's just definitely a different experience. And some people like that small talk because it kind of gives more conversation and you're kind of just interacting with people more. Other people hate it, like, don't talk to me, let's just get this over with type thing. And finally, the 7th reverse culture shock I want to talk about is that America feels very in your face when you're here, and I notice it more when I come back. It's very nationalistic. As soon as you get to the airport, there's tons of American flags everywhere. When you're driving around different towns, you see flags on people's lawns, politician signs. People are always talking about politics and certain things. So I think there's definitely a sense of nationalism here that many other countries are proud of their country too, but I think they reserve their flags more for government buildings and special occasions rather than the US, where it's just like, yeah, we're America and we're proud to be American. So it's very interesting seeing that from a different perspective when I come back, and it's open to your own interpretation, how you feel about that nationalism. But all right, those are 7 reverse culture shocks that I experience whenever I come back to visit the USA, and they're good, bad, maybe open your own interpretation, but I hope you at least enjoyed this video and found it interesting, maybe learned something, and I will see you guys on the next video.